My guest today is supposed to be in prison. Jeremy Hutchinson descends from Arkansas political royalty, son of a U.S. senator, nephew of a governor. The family tree has a politician at virtually every branch. Hutchinson himself served in both the state house and Senate until he was indicted by a federal grand jury. In 2023, Hutchinson was sentenced to 8 years in prison after a wide-ranging investigation involving bribery, tax fraud, and misuse of campaign funds. But after serving just 2 years, Hutchinson was pardoned by President Trump. In this conversation, we talk about Hutchinson's fall from grace, the cases against him, life in prison, and how the president changed everything with the stroke of a pen. Jeremy Hutchinson, welcome to the World and Stuff podcast. Thanks so much for coming on.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I'm flattered. I've listened to your other episodes, and you've got great guests, and so I appreciate you even thinking about me.
Well, I think this is going to be a really interesting conversation, and I want to get into it just by talking about what it was like growing up in the family that you did. I think most people listening to this podcast might not be fully aware with the dynamics of Arkansas politics, but your father, Tim, was a United States senator. His brother, your uncle Asa, was the governor of Arkansas. Your cousin, Jim, was the former state Senate majority leader. Your brother was in the Arkansas House. Your mom was in the House. You were in the Senate. You guys are like the Kennedys of Arkansas.
A much more impoverished version of the Kennedys.
Did
But
did that? Sorry, I just did that make life easy for you, or was there a lot of pressure to live up to what other people had achieved in your family?
well, I wouldn't call it pressure. My dad actually encouraged me not to run for the legislature the first time. Said politics is a difficult life, and he didn't foresee the difficulties that eventually encountered me. But even absent the criminal stuff, it's a challenging life and full of scrutiny. So there was certainly no pressure to get into politics. But uh, growing up, people, there's a song, "Son of a Senator," and people imagine that you grew up in wealth and privilege. And the truth is, my family was, borderline poverty my entire childhood. And my dad was a part-time professor and owned a radio station, and he certainly instilled education and the importance of reading, and there are a lot of blessings from growing up in my family, but he was not wealthy by any means. We didn't have a TV until I was in the ninth grade, primarily because we couldn't afford it. So it was not a childhood that most people envision, but the great memories I have are of my dad and my uncle sitting around talking politics. They both were involved, and my uncle ran unsuccessfully for the U.S. Senate in 1986. He actually ran unsuccessfully for prosecuting attorney in Benton County, Arkansas in 1978, I think. And then my dad got into the legislature in 84. But they were back then, the Republican Party of Arkansas was a handful of people. And so they managed to achieve leadership roles at a very young age, just because, not necessarily due to their talent or intellect, but because there was nobody else. And so to hear them discuss the inner workings of politics and the personalities, and then to hear them talk about how, especially my dad, who's in the legislature, how he was able to help people, and the gratitude that people had for little things, in the grand scheme of things, at least they were little, that he managed to do, gave me very positive feelings toward politics all growing up. Very competitive, and there's nothing that I have ever encountered that is as competitive as politics. The stakes are a lot higher than a football game, and that intrigued me and excited me. And so for those following reasons, I've been interested in politics since I was a youth. But never was pressured to run myself or to be engaged in politics. It just was, I think, like a lot of children, they find their father's work fascinating and are end up kind of following his footsteps. And that was certainly true of me.
You guys, like you said, were all Republicans back when Republicans were an endangered species in Arkansas. I think people would probably have a hard time believing this, but back as late as 2010, Democrats controlled both houses of the legislature and had every constitutional office.
Yeah.
I
Not only did they
started,
control the legislature, they had a super majority in both houses of the legislature.
yeah, that all started to kind of change when I kind of came to Arkansas and started covering politics around like 2013, 2014, and basically completely reversed from Democratic supermajorities to Republican supermajorities. Republicans win all the constitutional offices now. When I started covering politics, I don't know if this is going to get you in trouble with some of your new friends now, but like you were a moderate. Is that fair to say? I mean, you were kind of the one holding the line against some of the more, what I would say now, or the MAGA types.
Well, I would I would certainly say that that was a perception that I existed about me during my time in the legislature. I tend to think that I was conservative. I was uh, conservative using the traditional uh, definition of the word. Wanted to protect the Constitution. A lot of things that were being done, I viewed as unconstitutional. I made a joke from the well of the Senate one time when I got up and said, "No, this bill," I walked through why it's unconstitutional. And I said, having said that, I realized that unconstitutionality tends to pick up more votes than it does lose votes in this chamber. But I certainly the perception was that I was a moderate. On fiscal issues, I'm very conservative, and I think I think President Trump. There's people who disagree with his tweets and sometimes his antics, but as far as policy, I think even those who don't like him in the Republican Party have to acknowledge that policy wise, he's been very effective and has probably been the most unifying force within the Republican Party, not because of his personality, but because nobody can deny that the policies that he's enacted are things that the Republican Party as a whole has been fighting for since I've been around, at least.
But there were some issues like, I mean, back in that time period, it was like kind of a race to who could be the most extreme on issues like guns. I remember there was a point where they wanted to let people bring them into Razorback Stadium, and there was like on the Medicaid expansion issue. I think, yeah, I don't know. To me, you were kind of a voice of reason on some of those
I think
issues.
I was on guns. I mean, I'm a firm believer in the Second Amendment, but like every right we have, there are limits. And you mentioned the bill about bringing guns into Razorback Stadium, and we found out who's more popular in Arkansas, the NRA or the Razorbacks. The
It's
Razorbacks won.
close,
I
but
thought
yeah.
it would be closer than it was. The Razorbacks defeated the NRA pretty handily in that fight. Um, but there was a bill to allow to remove all gun restrictions from Arkansas, including I mentioned in committee. I said, so this would permit kindergartners to bring guns to the preschool, and the
Is that a
sponsor,
problem?
in my mind, it is. The sponsor had to concede that it, in fact, would allow that. So, in my mind, it's common sense. I don't see it as moderate or it's just some things are absurd. And we had a wing of the Republican caucus at that time who took things to the absurd, and I was happy to stand up for common sense, I guess.
During your time in the legislature, you had a bit of a reputation for living, I don't know, a fast life, maybe would be one way to say it. Arkansas Times put it this way: a member of one of Arkansas's most recognizable political dynasties, but cursed with the impulse control of an untrained golden Labrador puppy. Was
It's
there
a
any
little
truth to that?
harsh. a little harsh, but is there some truth? Yes. I, I, I mean, I'm proud of most of the things in my life and think I've had three amazing kids and accomplished a lot. I went to law school, working full time, and I'm proud of most things. But there was a phase I got a divorce from my first marriage, and I've lived a sloppy life for a few years. I'll put it that way. And it came back to haunt me, as we'll discuss later. But you know, I went to work every day. I maintained responsibilities, but certainly in my personal life, there was some sloppiness that I engaged in for several years, and as we can discuss later, it ultimately gave a avenue for scrutiny and the feds to look at me. And um, uh, when the feds look at you, they're probably going to find something. Even Saint Teresa, I think, could be susceptible to a fed's inspection.
We might as well talk about it now. So there's these cases that were against you. Just set the stage a little bit. You're a state senator at the time. This is a part-time job. So people that work in the Arkansas state legislature have other jobs. You were a lawyer, and you had these two clients that eventually got you in trouble. One was a healthcare provider. The other was an orthodontist. Over like a 3-year period or so, they paid you about $500,000, and you were accused of and pled guilty to essentially doing their bidding at the state capitol. Yeah, I read through last night a bunch of the court documents and saw the text messages. I think that's kind of a fair reading of what the text messages show. But you say that you abided by the letter of the law.
Well, I say that I abided by the Arkansas Senate ethics rules. As you said, it's a part-time legislature, and the designers of the Arkansas Constitution, I think, envisioned citizen legislators who participated in the economy, participated and had to live under the rules and regulations that they imposed. And there's a benefit to that. And most states have a part-time legislature. The challenge is separating you're a member of the economy, you've got clients, you've got customers, you've got patients, students, whatever career you've chosen. There's going to be some inevitable crossover between everybody. I mean, I meet somebody at the grocery store, they'd ask me, hey, can you change this? I mean, I want to be able to buy wine at the grocery store, and we can't do that in Arkansas. You need to change that. I mean, everywhere you went, and my clients were no different. Every client, not every, but almost every client, from the divorced dad coming in and complaining about how child support's treated in Arkansas and how dads get screwed and I should change that. It was inevitable to have. I'm a lawyer and I make laws, and it's inevitable for people not to ask for that. Um, I reported every client. I recused often. Um, but did I do some official acts for clients? Yes. There were official acts I would have done for anybody. No, I mean, they were de minimis, but they were official acts. And, signing a letter of recommendation, holding a budget. One of my clients recommended an amendment to an omnibus criminal justice reform bill that it was common sense, and I made that change. But I'd also said no when they asked for grant money because I didn't think that would be appropriate. But if you're asking about the technical, at the time, the Supreme Court case in 2024 changed the elements of bribery. But at the time, the Eight Circuit's standards were, did you receive money and did you perform an official act? And I did both those things. Now, I perform legal services for these clients, and I would, you know, argue that that should mitigate the strict interpretation of Section 666. But under the Eighth Circuit jurisprudence at that time, it didn't. So I pled guilty, shocked that it was a crime, but recognizing if that is a crime, I meet the elements of that. Now, again, a year after I started serving my sentence, Supreme Court came in and drastically changed and overturned Eighth Circuit precedents. And under that definition that the Supreme Court put forth in the Snyder case, I don't believe that I did commit bribery under Section 666.
The big question is like whether or not there's a quid pro quo, right? Can I just drill into the details on the cases,
Sure.
just so that we can make sure people know what we're talking about here? There is this organization called Preferred Family Health. They did like mental health and substance abuse services, worked with schools and kids a lot. State was spending a huge amount of money through Medicaid on this provider. I don't know if you know this, but I did like a whole investigative report on Preferred Family Health. Did you ever see that? I was looking back, I'm like, I wonder if this is what happened, how this case got started. Anyway,
Thanks, Drew.
No, I don't know. I don't know that for sure. But I mean, so it was like in early 2016, I did this whole story about there was a 5-year period where the neighboring states of Arkansas were each billing like under $10 million for these like group counseling sessions, whereas Arkansas was billing $150 million. I interviewed Robin Ravendrian, who ended up pleading guilty as part of this whole case that you were involved in. So there were efforts to rein in that spending, right? There was this thinking among some in the state that the state is spending way too much on Medicaid, and that would have impacted your client. Your client's the Preferred Family Health. They're paying you a $9,000 monthly retainer, and you're working at the legislature to try to prevent the state from spending less on programs that they offered, right?
Well, I mean, if they were seeking legislators to have influence over Medicaid spending, they picked the wrong legislator. I mean, I was a member of the Senate, but I wasn't on public health. I really had no, there were legislators who were far more involved in that issue than I. As you know, I was chairman of the Judiciary Committee and had a very narrow lane that I focused my efforts on. Now, they were a very political organization, and they try to cover all their bases. And I'm sure, and I freely admit that had I not been a state senator, I would not have been hired, I suspect, by Preferred Family. But that's probably true of most of my clients. I mean, most clients, if I got to hire a lawyer, I might as well hire the chairman of the Judiciary Committee. And for Preferred Family, a lot of the work I did for them was dealing with DHS in Medicaid recoupment cases. And I certainly, my role as state senator, I think, helped in those negotiations. And I understood Medicaid better than most lawyers. I wouldn't call myself a foremost expert, but the average lawyer never deals with Medicaid. So I would say that they certainly they needed a lawyer in Arkansas. They chose me because I was in the state Senate. But I don't know if it's fair to say that they chose me to make sure that Medicaid payments continued, because I certainly didn't do that, and I wasn't the best one that could have done that if that was her primary goal.
That was kind of, I don't know, it looked like from the text messages that's what you were, you're working with the lobbyist that's working with them. They're worried about this, that, or the other regulations going to come through and limit spending or cause these reforms that would, reform the system, but also cost them to lose out on business, right? And you're kind of working to prevent that from happening.
They certainly were concerned about some of the reforms that were happening, and they would tell me about it, and they pump me for information about what was happening at the Capitol. Um, I again, I mean, if you saw my text messages on my phone from everybody, it was
Everybody
that
wants you to do something.
well, everybody's wondering what's happening, where,
Yeah, yeah.
and
To a certain extent,
so
that's the job of a politician, to communicate with people. But I think what might make people feel uneasy is the fact that this person is paying you. And I don't want to dwell on this forever, but I also want to bring up the orthodontist. This orthodontist, I think it's actually, it's kind of a more interesting case, cut and dry case. I don't know what the right terminology is, but it's like this orthodontist wanted to be able to do dental cleanings. I guess in Arkansas, there was a law that prevented orthodontists from being able to clean teeth. He was actually doing the cleanings and got in trouble for it, and then hired you to try to figure this out. Why are the dentists allowed to do cleanings and I can't do cleanings? I have more schooling than them. And so you're working to try to get the law changed in Arkansas to allow orthodontists to be able to do dental cleanings. Obviously, that would be great for his business. And though I'm reading his text message to you, and he's kind of like yelling at you, like, I can't believe how much I'm paying you, and you can't freaking get this law changed, which I can't believe you can talk to state lawmakers like that. I didn't know that as a journalist. I was always trying to be a little bit more polite than that. But I guess, yeah, I don't know. If taken as a whole, these two cases, do you understand why people might look at that and be like, this is what's wrong with politics? Like, people with a
sure,
lot of
I
money
do.
give politicians money and then they go to the Capitol and they defend their interests. And I don't have any money and I don't know any politicians to give and I don't have people defending me.
Sure, I do. Again, it's complicated and nuanced because, first of all, to clarify, I was working on that. The orthodontist CEO was a very good friend of mine, and he approached me about this dental cleaning, teeth cleaning issue, and I was shocked that a dentist can perform orthodontics works. Who orthodontists have been to graduate top of their class, go get a few more years of training to be able to do braces, and yet dentists can do braces without that actually few years of training. But orthodontists can't do teeth cleanings. That seemed backwards to me. So I was engaged on that issue just because my friend brought it to my attention, and that's how I got to know the orthodontist. Was I was already working on it before, um, and then he through countless conversations and meetings, they said they needed in Arkansas, they needed lawyers. They were paying a lot on individual cases, and they'd like to hire me. And they that orthodontist was the most litigious person I've ever met in my life. I was suing his neighbors. I was suing. I mean, it they got their money's worth. What they
Although
paid
he
me.
didn't seem to think so, according to the text messages.
Well, what was funny about those text messages, he was a complete jerk, as you can
Yeah, I
tell.
could tell.
And he called me. I mean, he flew a plane down. He was up in Northwest Arkansas, flew a plane down to pick me up and flew me up there and said, "You're not responding fast enough. I don't care if you are in the legislature. You got to get this legal work done." And I said, I try to do better, and I think I did, but it it never felt like a bribe to me because
I mean,
he
eventually you got
was,
the legislation passed, the law
well,
changed,
I
right?
didn't. I
No,
know.
but you were helping.
Well, it wasn't even passed by the time what he did, what I did, I guess, for him was there was a large organization, national organization, and he asked me to talk to them and kind of give them a lay of the land. And I did that and recommended a lobbyist that they could hire. And they hired that lobbyist, and that lobbyist with some other legislators eventually got it passed. By the time it was passed, this orthodontist didn't care about the issue anymore at all. And so he never even benefited from but I did assist, in my mind. I mean, I did a lot more for people who were not my clients than I ever did for my client. I didn't see it as, but maybe that's my own, short sightedness, but I didn't see it as I was following the Senate ethics rules. I was trying to help people, clients, non-clients, just whoever was asking. But in hindsight, I wish I had certainly put up a Chinese wall and not um, allowed clients to have any uh, input or any ability to message me about policy. But I didn't. That's like I said, there was some sloppiness in my life at the time,
There,
and so
the last thing I want to bring up about these cases, and then we can talk about what happens after them, is this issue of using campaign funds for like personal stuff. There was, I guess, over 7 years, you raised north of $350,000, and there was what the investigation found is that you had used like 70,000 of that for personal expenses. There was a cruise to the Caribbean, vacation to New Orleans, personal food, groceries, gas, gym memberships, school tuition, jewelry, Netflix. Is all this just like what politics is?
no, I first of all, I mean, I think we did an accounting, and there's like a $3,000 discrepancy. What most of those were, I was going through a divorce. I was in the middle of the legislative session. I should have, but I didn't think I had time to go set up I had a joint bank account with my estranged wife. Divorce wasn't finalized, but we were estranged. And so all income that I was putting into our joint account was being spent quickly by my estranged wife. So for a few months during the session, the only bank account I had was a campaign account. And so I was putting personal money into the campaign account and then living off of it, essentially. And then when the session ended, I went and had that changed and got my own personal account. Now that is wrong. It's a violation of campaign finance, Arkansas State campaign finance rules. But there wasn't a massive, this was my personal money that I should never put into the account, but due to laziness or busyness or whatever, I thought it was the most efficient thing to do. And again, it not a complete excuse, because it certainly violated state campaign finance rules, but there was not like a effort to siphon money out of campaign donors and live off of it.
When did you first find out like the feds were looking into you or there was something going on?
2013. But and I had been trying not to divulge attorney-client privilege information, but I had a client who had been working with the feds in obviously another matter, and I had assisted, bringing him in to meet with the feds as a witness. And so I got a call from an FBI agent who said, "I know you've been working with agent so and so. I have some questions. Would you be willing to come in?" And I assumed it was about my client. And so I went and was ambushed, and it was about me. And I should have, and I told the FBI agent, if I was representing me, I'd tell myself to get up and leave right now. But I think people who believe they're innocent and I certainly did, have a desire to just explain it. Let me explain this. Let's calm down here. Let me explain what is really going on. And so I sat there for hours and tried to offer explanations. And it obviously didn't work. In fact, it backfired. They used some of the information I had given him and, in my mind, twisted it to end up indicting me. But certainly when I left that meeting, I knew I'm under investigation. And
That's
that was in
2013.
2013. However, in 2015, they closed the investigation. And um, and then in 2017, a new U.S. attorney reopened it, and or maybe 2016. I'm not certain when they did that, but at some point they reopened it and indicted me shortly thereafter on the same information that the predecessor had closed the case on.
After he saw my story.
Probably. That's
Oh,
probably exactly right.
did you ever think about taking it to trial? I mean, talk about that process. So they're saying we're going to prosecute you. I guess the first question is, do you think there was I've heard some people suggest that there's a political aspect. This was, you were being prosecuted because your last name. I mean, your dad's the governor at the time, right? I mean, or not,
My
sorry,
uncle.
Your
Uncle's
uncle's the
governor.
governor at the time. Your dad's a former U.S. senator. It's all Republicans running the state. They're coming after you because you're a Republican? Or you're
No,
Hudson?
I don't think it's Republican. I think, uh, and this is, I mean, obviously, I've talked to some former U.S. attorneys who tell me this is the mindset, but I've certainly not talked to my prosecutors, and I can't divine what their motivations or intentions are. So this is purely speculative, but I suspect that based on the questions they asked me about my uncle and other powerful people in Arkansas, that they saw me as a, if they could squeeze me enough, they could go up the flagpole and get some really big fish. And certainly, the last name was, they received a lot of notoriety, and it was a big win. But I don't think it was, we got to go get Republican and he's a Republican. Let's get him. I think it was more to do with, like they do every case. Let's start with the mid-level guy and then try to turn him so we can go up and get the cartels. And I was somebody who knew a lot of powerful people, and had left myself exposed, and they saw an opportunity to try to use me to get my uncle and some others. I, for the record, my uncle and anybody else they asked me about, I have no knowledge of them of ever doing anything unseemly, even much less illegal. But I was certainly questioned for days and days about other people. I did intend to go to trial. They first indicted me in Little Rock and in the Eastern District of Arkansas, and I intended to go to trial.
That's on the Dennis case?
No, it was actually, they first indicted me on the campaign finance and tax in Little Rock. And they offered a plea agreement, but they said that we will seek relevant conduct, which is something that I find to be atrocious and unconstitutional. That at the federal level, the state levels, they can't do this, but federal level, they can ask a judge to sentence you based on conduct that you haven't been indicted for and certainly haven't been found guilty of. And a judge only has to use a preponderance of the evidence standard, a 50.001% likelihood that you did it, to sentence you. There's no beyond a reasonable doubt standard. There's no jury findings. It's just, and so if I had pled guilty to a tax or campaign, I would be going before a judge, and they would be presenting evidence of bribery and trying to seek a much larger sentence. So, for one of the things I think our system needs to reform is that relevant conduct. I don't think that's just. They ought to have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt before they can sentence you for some conduct.
Yeah. That seems
But
crathey could take that into
I
consideration.
I didn't
Like,
know it existed. I was a lawyer, chairman of the Judiciary
what kind of
Committee.
evidence are they using in that? I mean, they actually bring in witnesses in a case, or it's just like what the prosecutor says, like, hey, they show them the depositions or something? How do they even
No,
know?
they can, at the sentencing hearing, they can present evidence. They can bring in witnesses. They can do whatever they think is necessary.
You
But
double parked one time at a grocery store.
yeah, and a judge is, again, it's only preponderance of the evidence standard. And I just was shocked when I learned of that because as you know, I was doing criminal justice reform on the state level, which also painted me as a moderate. Um, and
Did that
I
make you a
wanted,
target, do you think?
it didn't help. um, it didn't help. Some of the
That never really
prosecutors,
crossed my mind that maybe, people were,
some of,
when I hear people say, oh, it's political, they went after because he was a Hutchinson. I mean, I don't know. You were one of the most powerful families in Arkansas, but if you told me that there were people in the law enforcement and prosecuting community that are pissed off about the way you handled criminal justice reform, I can believe that.
well, I know they were some, not all prosecutors. I had a good relationship with a lot of the state
Yeah.
prosecutors, but there were certainly a handful of state prosecutors who were livid with me, and we spent hundreds of hours negotiating my bills on criminal justice reform, and sometimes those meetings would end with heated exchanges, and it was no pleasantries were exchanged on the way out the door. And so I know there were certainly prosecutors upset with me, but I wanted to go back after I discovered the federal system. I wanted to go back and apologize to all those state prosecutors because compared to the federal system, the state system is a paragon of virtue. I mean, there is no relevant conduct. There's a lot. I could get into a lot of stuff that's different between state and federal criminal justice systems, but I was shocked that irrelevant conduct, they could sentence me based on conduct that was not proven to a jury, that was not even I wasn't even indicted for. There's also just, this wasn't in my case, but a judge can sentence you for conduct that you were acquitted. A jury comes back and finds you not guilty. Prosecution can ask, there's attempts to change at least this part, but currently, I believe, I know, but at least until recently, I think it's still current. A, a judge can say, well, the jury found you not guilty, but based on preponderance of evidence, I think you are guilty, and I'm going to go ahead and sentence you
Because it's a
for,
different standard.
yeah.
The jury was
And
doing reasonable doubt. The judge saw that's crazy. Let me ask you, when you were indicted, I mean, you're a state senator, you're a lawyer, you're kind of a hot shot in Arkansas, and then come from a very prominent family, and you're indicted. I imagine that was a big hit and things changed. What was it like to go from like kind of that high pedestal to being an indicted politician? It's like one of the things that society likes least, I feel like.
yeah, that's what my lawyer warned me about going to trial. He said, juries don't like lawyers and they don't like politicians, and you happen to be both. But quite frankly, the indictment was the worst punishment that I've suffered. Prison was terrible, and we can talk about it, but the worst punishment was the public humiliation, the loss of everything. I mean, law license, of reputation, of friendships, of, my relationship with my kids suffered because of it. I mean, it it was the most painful thing I've ever endured in my life, even more so than 2 years in prison. But I lost. Um, I couldn't even get a job at Amazon in the warehouse. Uh, they were hiring other felons, and kudos to them for doing that. But I guess I was all over the news, and it was a different situation with me than typical drug offender or more anonymous felon. So I ended up delivering for DoorDash and mowing lawns and cutting down trees and selling it for firewood and doing construction, just whatever I could do to try to bring in some income for my household. My wife had a good job, she's a nurse, but It was a very, very challenging and difficult period, and that period ended up extending for 5 years, from the time I was indicted till the time I was sentenced, um, and 4 years from the time I pled guilty to the time I was sentenced. And it was, both me and my wife, as painful as it was going to be, we were counting down the days. Please let me go to prison. Let me get this over with. I just want to be able to say, all right, this is how much time we have left. Let's start counting the days down. Sitting there waiting for sentencing for that long, not knowing even how long you have till you can put this in the rearview mirror. That was the most difficult part of the entire ordeal.
Was there ever any thought about going to trial, fighting it?
Oh yeah, we're intending to do that, but they we turned down the initial plea offer, um,
Which
but
was
then, which was the one, whenever I was indicted in the Eastern District of Arkansas. I don't remember the terms of it, but the
okay.
biggest reason that we turned it down was because of relevant conduct. That they said they were still going to try to ask for a
Use
sentence
the other
based off.
cases against you.
Right, the other cases I hadn't been indicted on bribery yet, but they were investigating it. And so when we turned that down, they said, well, we're going to indict you in the Western District of Arkansas. Or no, maybe it was Missouri. I think Missouri came first, or came second actually. But and so they indicted me in the Western District of Missouri, and so now I had two trials to prepare for, and the trials were within 6 weeks of each other if I had exercised my speedy trial rights. And uh, my dad and I, mostly my dad, had spent a lot of money on attorney's fees, um, but I still was planning to fight it. And then they informed me they're going to indict me in the third district, the Western District of Arkansas. And my lawyers searched; they never found a case where somebody's been indicted in three different districts for an alleged scheme that all occurred in Little Rock. I mean, everything, they could have been superseded the indictments in Little Rock and done that if they wanted to. But by indicting me in three different locations, first of all, the legal fees were going to be, I mean, they already bankrupted me. They would have bankrupted my dad. And secondly, I'd have to win all three trials. The government only needed to win one. And if I had lost all three trials, that last sentencing would have been my third offense. And I would have probably gotten 25 years. And the risk of going to trial became impossible, at least from my perspective. Maybe there's other people who are stronger, but I love my wife, and I could not envision being separated basically for the rest of my life. And so I took the next plea offer they offered. It was a global plea agreement to settle all three cases, and I took it.
When you were sentenced to 8 years in prison, was that a devastating blow? I think I was reading that you guys were hoping to like stack the sentences on top of each other, so it would be a shorter sentence.
Well, in virtually every case, the sentences are run concurrent, it's called, which is you serve the sentences concurrently. And when I signed the global plea agreement, my understanding was that the maximum exposure I'd have was to be 5 years. And that was true statutorily. But my lawyers never expected it. They never thought courts would go along. My lawyer kept trying to soothe my concerns by saying they are not going to run these consecutively. I mean, that never happens. But it happened. The government objected to their own probation officer's report. Probation officer suggested they're concurrent, and the government objected and said we want them to run them consecutive. And the judge in Missouri went along with it, and that was devastating.
That all happened in court on one day. You went into court thinking you were going to get 5
Well, I
years and
went
you never.
to Little Rock to be sentenced, and it was more than I had thought. It was 40, basically 4 years, um, more than I had thought it would be. But it was, I mean, I prepared myself for it. Um, and it was not unfair. I wish it had been more generous, but it wasn't unfair. Um, but when I went to Missouri for the second sentencing, I was relieved because I was thinking, well, worst thing that can happen is I get an extra 12 months or so. But I never thought that they'd run it consecutively. And that was based on everything that I had read, everything my lawyers had told me, the probation officer's recommendation. Um, and so when the judge came back and ran them consecutively and increased it to 8 years, I was, I was devastated. And I called my wife on the way home, and I didn't ask her to go. I didn't ask anybody to go to Missouri because I thought it was going to be kind of a pro forma. Um, and so I was there by myself with my lawyer, and he hit me with that. And I had to drive back from Springfield to Little Rock, just contemplating.
Knowing that you just
Eight,
lost 3 years of your life.
yeah. And I called my wife and told her she needs to divorce me. And it's not fair to ask her to wait for me that long. And to her credit and my relief, she said that's insane. But that's where my mind was, that everybody needs to get as far away from me as possible, because I'm never coming out. I'm a goner.
I sometimes do this exercise in my head. I don't know if you've ever done it before. Like, how long would a sentence have to be for me to rather like die? Like, it wouldn't be worth living that long in prison. Probably not 8 years, but you're getting closer. I don't know if you ever like
I
thought
think it
like,
depends on your
I don't know. This
age.
is, yeah, it's like 8 years in prison. Like, is this worth it? I don't know. Did that ever cross your mind?
Yeah. Um, on that drive back, I mean, it wasn't serious contemplation, but I I thought about just, if I just ran off the road here, people would think I had an accident. My kids wouldn't be, embarrassed thinking that I'd committed suicide, but I'd sure save a lot of people a lot of anguish and pain if I just ended it. And again, it was fleeting and wasn't seriously considered, but yeah, those
I think we've all
thoughts,
had thoughts like that before.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I I met guys in prison. One gentleman, he was 82, and it was the dead of summer. He was so frail, dead of summer in Forest City, Arkansas. I spent a week in Forest City, uh, and he'd walk around with a full coat on because he was just so frail. Even in 100-degree weather, he'd have to wear a coat. And so I asked him, "What are you here for?" And he said, "Real estate fraud." I have no idea what that is. But I said, "How long did you get?" And he said, "I got 12 years." And I said, "How old are you?" And he goes, "I'm 82 right now." And I was like, "That's a death sentence." And I said, "What? Does your family, are they sticking by you?" And he said, "My wife of 50 years divorced me. And as soon as I got sentenced, said she didn't want to die alone." And I'm like, "Geez."
Wow.
I mean, when I was feeling very sorry for myself until I got to prison and heard all these other stories. And I'm not I'm not alone, and I'm certainly not the worst case. There are a lot of tragic stories.
Of people getting screwed. As you're getting ready to go to prison, are you like working out, taking boxing
Oh,
lessons, MMA? Like, that's what I
no.
always think. Like, I got to be ready when I get in there. I got to knock the first guy out that I see.
I should have been doing that, but I was honestly suffering from a mild form of depression, and I just lacked motivation to do much of anything. I actually gained weight and was just not in a good place. Now, again, that wasn't severe depression, but it was just a very
It's I'm about to go to
constant,
prison for 8 years.
right? That kind of depression, you know.
Yeah.
um,
If you were happy,
and
you'd be weird.
yeah, so no, I was not prepared for prison, but I got lucky and got a good cellmate. My first cellmate was a lawyer from Memphis who um, I identified with and connected with. He was only there for like 3 months before he went home, but I mean, I think God put him there to help me with that transition. Um, and then I started. I mean, I ran a marathon. The
I
first six
saw.
months I was in prison, I
So you worked
started
out a
running,
lot. You
and
got in shape pretty quick.
yeah, I started running, and then it's like I can't control anything of my life right now, so I need to find something that I can aim for and control. And so I had my wife send me a marathon training schedule, and I posted it on my little cell wall, and I'd mark off training days. And by December, I ran 26.2 miles in prison, 170 times around this little track we had. Um, but I shaved off a lot of weight, got in much better shape, felt a lot better mentally, and it I maintained that type of, I guess, discipline, or just you don't have anything else to do. You can either sleep away your sentence, or you can try to make the most of it. And I try to make the most of it. And so
What's
the good thing, Drew, is it cost me 2 years of my life, but honestly, it probably preserved 4 or 5 years on the back end. I think I've extended my lifespan by going to prison and getting in shape and changing my lifestyle.
what's prison like for a former state lawmaker? Is it, I don't know, some people might have this vision in their minds of like a nice little retirement home looking type setup where white collar criminals from privileged families get to go.
No. I mean, I did go to a camp, which is the lowest security level of the BOP, and there's no child molesters there, and there's no violent, well, there are violent people there, but nobody there has been convicted of a violent crime. But there were certainly violent people there. They just hadn't been caught. Um, I've I've found that if you're a nice guy and can get along with people on the outside, you'll probably do okay in prison. If you're a jerk on the outside, uh, you're going to have a very difficult time in prison. I, as long as you show respect, it wasn't. I mean, there was one evening that I was fearful for my life. It wasn't completely without some bumps, but by and large, as long as you, and I was one of 4 or 5 white collar people in my prison. The rest were drug offenders. Um, and so it's not like club fed, or where there's all these white collar people are together. There's very few of us, at least in my first place, my first prison. And so I met some unbelievably kind, and there's one gentleman, I won't say his name, but he'd been in since the 90s, and all he'd ever done was sell marijuana. Now, he'd been arrested several times, but that was all he'd ever done, was sell marijuana. And one of the sweetest spirits I've ever encountered. And he African American, and he's obviously in his 60s now because he's been there for nearly 30 years. But he invited me to play basketball. He saw me shooting hoops and invited me to play on his basketball team. And but one day we're in the computer room sending emails out, and he asked me, "Hey Hutch," they all call me Hutch. "Hey Hutch, how do you spell Bofus?" And I was like, "Bofus? I'm not familiar with that word." I said, "Can you use it in a sentence?" And he looked back at his computer screen and read, "Bofus need to call the probation officer." I was like, "Oh," and I got up and I went over and I deleted Bofus and typed both of us. And he was embarrassed and apologized. And I said, "Man, you don't need to apologize." And he said, "I only got through third grade, and I just never And walked away and I was thinking, we failed as a society. We failed that gentleman. I mean, he's never had a job and never can have a hope of getting a job. And he fell through the cracks and nobody noticed or cared. And yet we sentenced him to 30 years for selling marijuana, the only thing he can do to try to put some food on his table. And we then pat ourselves on the back and say we've achieved justice. There's nothing just about failing a child and then rewarding ourselves when we sentence the man to 30 years. And I've found those types of cases constantly. And as long as you, at least I've found, as long as you show respect and appreciate their story and their life journey, and you don't have a whole lot to worry about. Now, there's obviously you can get on the wrong side of something with a really bad hombre and you need to be worried. But 95% of the inmates that I encountered, you show them proper respect, they'll do the same.
So this isn't the type of thing where you had to join like a skinhead gang to protect you from the other racial
No,
groups in the
no, it was, now that I've heard there are guys who come from mediums and work their way down to camp, and they would tell me those stories. And I asked one guy who was a shot caller, he became a really good friend of mine. He, he was a shot caller for the whites at a medium. And, I asked him, what if I showed up at the medium? What would, he said, I'd come over and I'd talk to you and I kind of give you the lay of the land. And I'd say, we want to protect you. And I said, you'd have to go do some work. That's the term they use. You got to go do some work, which means go beat somebody up. But he said, I'd send you with a couple of other guys. And he said, your benefit to us would you calm, nerves, you calm the situation down. So I'd love to have you because I got some guys who somebody needs to go along and kind of be the adult and make sure the beating doesn't get too extreme. And so he goes, so you'd have to do that once, maybe twice. And then after that, I never ask you to do anything else. I know that's not your spirit. That's not, so I wouldn't ask you to do it. You'd have to prove yourself once or twice, but that's it. And, but this guy, I mean, just I got to know him really well. And he's not violent. He did what you do what you have to do in those environments. And he could provide a beating. But he didn't like it. He wasn't looking for it. But he was had the most ingenuity, resourcefulness. He could fix anything. He could solve any issue. And I'm sitting there looking at him. I'm like, the United States has won a lot of wars because of men like him. And if we had a war going on, he'd be coming back as a Congressional Medal of Honor winner. Instead, he had nothing to do with his time and his days and ended up here. But I mean, I looked around prison. There's a lot of guys in different times would be heroes that for whatever reason they didn't have that opportunity and came here, but incredibly talented, can make anything out of anything. I mean, MacGyver doesn't hold a candle to their resourcefulness. And it was a fascinating study just on humanity being there.
Was the food as bad as people say it would be?
The first place I went, Millington, I was the kitchen clerk, which is, I did I ordered the food and controlled the inventory and try to prevent too much theft from the inmates stealing the food out of the kitchen. That's part of the perks of working in the kitchen. You get to steal food, but they couldn't steal so much that we couldn't feed everybody. So I was like, steal that, you can steal that, but don't steal this. And that food was actually, I mean, it's nothing like eating at home, but it was good. We put spices in it. We try to make as good a food as we could, given the, what we had in the pantry and in the fridge. And it wasn't bad. And you could get seconds most of the time. If there was enough food, they'd say, come on. I thought that was normal. And I went to other places, and it was that was such an extreme gift to be there for a year and a half, because the other places I went, the food was atrocious. I mean, and the serving sizes were it's supposed to be 4 ounces of protein each meal, and they would use a ice cream scooper to get your meat, and just one little scoop like you get an ice cream, and that would it's probably less than 2 ounces of protein. And there's no seconds, and it was never they wouldn't use salt, they wouldn't use anything. I'll give you an example. The At my first place, when we have scrambled eggs, we had a ton of eggs that would come in and stay in the fridge, and we get out, we crack 400 eggs, and put them all in a big, all the yolks in a big, and then we come and pour it onto the skillet and scramble eggs like you would at home. Um, I went to Montgomery, and they got their yolks in the 5 gallon bags, and it just came pre-cracked, I guess, or post-cracked. It was already cracked, and they just put all these yolks in a 5 gallon bag and sent it to the prison. Well, instead of cutting that bag open and pouring the yolks on a skillet, they would throw the entire bag into a boiling pot of water. And the eggs, first of all, you had plastic seeping into the eggs, but it wasn't scrambled. I don't know what it was. It was unedible. I mean, it was terrible. It was like rubber. I mean, it was, and they serve that twice a week, and that was your protein. And it was, I mean, there's guys at my last place in Montgomery who were losing 20 pounds, and they didn't want to. I mean, they just were not getting enough food. Now, you can buy food in commissary to supplement what they feed you, but they would close commissary, mass punishment, say nobody's getting commissary for a month. And then you relied exclusively on the food you got from the kitchen, and it wasn't enough to sustain life for a grown man, at least. It was less than what you get in kindergarten lunch
You,
trays.
you mentioned that there was one like scary night or moment. What happened with that?
Well, as I was in the kitchen, and it was, I I told a guy who was a huge, very strong individual. Uh, I told him that he couldn't steal that. We needed that for lunch on Tuesday or whatever. And most of the time I said that, inmates were like, cool, okay. I wasn't trying to be like the police saying, I just like, hey, I know what the menu is, and this we need and this we don't. And they all were fine with it. But this guy wasn't. He really wanted that, and he got mad, and nothing happened there in the kitchen, but he was mad, and he stormed out and left work. And that night, contraband is everywhere in prisons. It's inevitable. And so he had this cheap vodka that was prevalent, and he got drunk, and it was about midnight, and I was trying to sleep, but he was ranting and raving, walking around all over the unit. And then I heard Hutchinson, and I heard Senator, and I was like, he's talking about me. And uh, he was threatening, and I'm going to kick his ass, blah, blah, blah. Just going, and so I went and got the padlock off of my locker and put it in a sock where I could swing it. Because being in bed, that's the most vulnerable. The shower and your bed are the two most vulnerable spots you can be. And so I had that, and I went to sleep that night with that sock. I eventually went to sleep. I stayed awake a long time, but eventually went to sleep with that sock right next to my head, ready to swing it but he didn't. He finally petered out and went to bed himself, and nothing ever really happened. But that was the only time that I was truly scared, was that night.
You said contraband is everywhere. Like people have booze and drugs and cell phones.
Yes, yes, and yes. The drugs actually wasn't as bad as I thought it would be. Uh, there was only a handful of drug users. Now, there was
But you
marijuana.
could get it.
Oh, yeah, you get it. There's marijuana vapes that people had that were more prevalent. But like hardcore drugs, only if, I don't know, probably 5% of the inmate population ever used hardcore, and they were ostracized. I mean, people didn't like them because they could cause problems for everybody. And so the drugs weren't really nearly as bad as I thought they'd be. Now, the alcohol was everywhere, and then phones were everywhere. And it was and I understand the reason why you don't want to have phones in like high security prisons or with violent people, because they could text victims and they could commit further crimes using their phones or something. But most of the guys who had them where I was, they just wanted to be able to video time their kids, and they weren't using the phones for anything nefarious, just trying to stay in touch with their families. But nonetheless, it's against the rules, and but they were everywhere. And the phones, what I learned, phones at mediums and certainly penitentiaries, I mean, they'll go for like, one phone will go like $5,000. There were guys at both places who would make six figures a year just running their little hustle inside a prison. Cash. I mean, there's no taxes paid. There were guys, there are not many of them, but there were a few guys who, when their out date was approaching, they would intentionally get in a fight with somebody just so they didn't have to go home. I mean, they wanted to stay there. They were making good money. They had 3 meals. They didn't have family that they really go back to. And so they were scared to death of being released. And so they do whatever they could do to get more time tacked onto their sentence. It was crazy.
What's the rules regarding a married man and, like visits with their wife?
It doesn't happen.
Really?
Not in the federal system. Now, it happened, but not through a conjugal visit. Guys would sneak off and meet the girl down the road, and
You can do that?
well,
Because it was the
no,
because no, I know, but like, aren't
you're
there
not
walls?
allowed to do it. But
Well, why not just
there's
keep going and leave if you can do that?
well, because you'll get a new charge
Yeah.
for escape or something, and
So that's just like a product of it being a minimum security type situation, is that you could walk off if you wanted to?
yeah, I mean, the first place I went didn't have a fence, period, and so yeah, you could walk off, and it was next to a neighborhood, and you could walk through the woods. Your girl would be down in the cul-de-sac, jump in and go spend the day together, and then come back before 4 o'clock count. Now, most guys didn't do that. I certainly never did that.
That was my next question.
No, God, no, because
Because you get in trouble when you get more time.
well, you don't get more time. Well, you do get more time because you lose good time credits, and you go to the shoe where you're not earning FSA credits, so that you don't get new charges, but that you end up serving more time because you lose credits. Now, you can get new charges if they deem it to be an escape attempt. If they recognize it just as, you're bringing in contraband, or they'll throw you in the shoe, and it's miserable. It's certainly punishment, but you don't get new charges unless they deem it to be an escape attempt. So there were not a lot, but there were certainly guys who were willing to take the risk or suffer the punishment to either
Were
bring.
you were in the shoe in the beginning just because of your status? Is that right?
It wasn't at the beginning. During transportation, left Millington and went to Montgomery, Alabama. And during that transportation, they're supposed to put you on a Greyhound bus. For somebody in my custody category, they're supposed to put you on a Greyhound bus and send you there. You got to report by noon, such and such day. Because we'd go work out in the community unsupervised every day. I mean, every weekday. mowing lawns or being on the naval base and no supervision whatsoever. And so we should be able to take the Greyhound bus, but they weren't doing that. And so they put me on a bus at 3 a.m. in the morning and sent me to Oklahoma City, where I was put into the shoe because I was a high profile inmate, which I was like, I am not high profile. I've never been. I'm certainly not one now. Nobody cares. But they threw me in there for a week. And then for my protection, they threw me in there, even though I'd been in general population at a camp for 18 months and was fine. But then they threw in a Mexican gang leader who had murdered somebody at some other facility, and he had a hit out on him. And so they had to throw him in the shoe for his protection, and they threw him in with me. And so for a week, he and I were shared a small little cell, never left, didn't make phone calls. My wife didn't know where I was. And then I jumped on Con Air. So I've experienced it all. Jumped on Con Air, and they flew me to Atlanta, where I spent another few days. And it's the worst facility in the BOP. And then finally I got to Montgomery, my final destination. But that transportation was probably the worst 2 weeks of my prison experience.
Your dad had been working on a pardon for you before you even went to prison, right? At the end of the first Trump administration, he paid a lobbyist to try to get you a pardon, and it didn't work out. I wonder, are you watching the whole election in 2023, 2024? You're like, man, I really need Trump to get into office so I can have another shot at this. Did you look at it that way?
No, I mean, I watched the election as best I could. I mean, news is not the favorite thing to watch on TV in prison. Most inmates do not care at all about the news. And I will say, probably 85% of them love Donald Trump, especially after he was convicted. I mean, his popularity in prison skyrocketed. And so they would occasionally sit there, like election night. I mean, they were transfixed. The whole TV room was full of inmates. And like I said, 85, even though the population was probably 85% African American, they were almost all of them were for Trump. And so I watch with just, I'm like you said, I enjoy politics and I'm interested. I did not really hold out much hope that I would get a pardon.
Because it didn't work the first time?
Yeah. And just, I mean, you said my dad hired a lobbyist. He wasn't really, he was a lawyer who registered just because he felt like he needed to. And dad hardly spent anything to hire him. I think it was $10,000. And dad hadn't contributed huge. I don't know what he gave. He may have given, $2,000 or something to the Trump campaign. I'm not sure, but not like any mega donor. And
well, and your uncle this whole time is saying everything in the book about Trump. He's going to be terrible. He wouldn't vote for him. He's running for president as well. So I don't know. Maybe that would have been the best case scenario if he becomes president.
I don't think he.
Although I don't know. He's kind of a stickler for the rule. Hey, was there a point where you're watching all this go down where your uncle is the foremost critic of Donald Trump and thinking in the back of your mind that Donald Trump is the only thing that is even a chance for me possibly getting out of here? Hey, Asa, how about you shut up about this?
No, I mean, first of all,
there had to be some frustration thinking, look, could somebody else be the spokesperson against it?
Yeah, I was like, seriously, are you the only one who can? But I also, I mean, I know he felt how he felt, and it's not fair to ask him to silence himself on my behalf. And I also, well, I was for Trump, and I've, since 2016, I wasn't for him when he first ran in the primary, but I've certainly been for him. And I didn't hold out a lot of hope that if he's elected, I'm out of here. I mean, there was not like this causal link that his election results in me being out of here. So it wasn't as compelling to me because I really didn't think I knew my dad would do everything he could, but the odds were astronomical that it would happen. And so I was interested in the race, but not so much because I thought it was my ticket to getting out of there. It's just I like politics and was fascinated by the campaign.
So you're like 2 years into your sentence. What do you know about what's going on? Your dad's working on this. Did you at that point are thinking like, hey, I got 6 more years. This is going to go on forever. Or do you know that he's working on something and there's a chance that something might be coming down?
I knew he was working on it, but he didn't. He wouldn't uh, tell me any details. I mean, you can only communicate. I didn't have a phone, so you can only communicate uh, through the BOP email system or the phones, and they monitor that. And he didn't want to. I don't think it had been a big issue, but he felt like because everybody's trying to get out. I mean, that's not anything
Everybody's
the
probably got
BOP
their
is
like
shocked
thing.
by that you're trying to get out of. But he didn't feel comfortable having those conversations. And then the main reason was he didn't want to get my hopes up. And so he didn't tell me much of anything. Uh, and so when it happened, I was shocked. And there were guys in Montgomery walking around talking about they're going to get a pardon, they're going to get a pardon. And I never talked about it because I didn't, it sounds kind of arrogant, and B, because I really didn't think I would. So what's the point of discussing it? And so when I came back they called me over the loudspeaker, and I was like, why are they calling me? It was right before Chow, and uh, I had sent a formal grievance the day before, and used the language, this policy is the epitome of bureaucratic foolishness, which I didn't think was that scathing, but inmates were like, I can't believe you said that. They don't like to be called fools or bureaucrats, and you're going to end up in the shoe. And so when I got the call to come to the office, uh, all my buddies were like, I told you, you're going to go to the shoe, and they're like, can I have your pillow when you go? And so I walked over there thinking this is not going to be good. And then I walk in, and the cop first says, get the F out of here. And I was like, you called me over here. I'm Hutchinson. And he's like, Hutchinson. And he's, Hutchinson. Yeah. Go pack your stuff. We got to immediately release you. You got a pardon. And I fell against the wall, and I was like, thank you, Jesus. Thank you, Jesus. And it was unbelievable. But then I had to go back to my buddies, and they were all like, you going to the shoe? Did you get in trouble? And it's like, no, quite the opposite. I got a pardon. I said it quietly because I was feeling survivor's guilt. I mean, there's some really bad dudes in prison. There's some of the best guys I ever met are also in prison, and some of them deserve grace and more than I do. And for me to be able to walk out and leave them there, it was tough. And I've experienced where friends of mine leave and you're happy for them, but you're also bitter. And so I knew what they were experiencing. So I said it real quietly. I'm going home. I got a pardon. And they were excited, and I mean, acted excited. I'm sure they were, but there also had to be some bitterness. But they laid hands on me and prayed for me. And uh, they did. I mean, within 30 seconds, there was a whole probably 30 guys down around my cell. Like, are you going to use the rest of that toothpaste? Can I have that? Can I have your deodorant? Just pick me clean. And, but I didn't go home, which is another story for the 24 hours. And, it was actually, I hated it because my wife, brother had driven in, and was midnight. They got there and I wasn't able to leave. But it was good because I got to say my goodbyes to everybody, and like I said, guys were praying with me, and um, it was I'm glad looking back on it, I had that 24 hours to say my goodbyes. But it was, I mean, obviously I was excited, but I also just felt really bad leaving so many guys who I've grown to care about. And it's not right that they're there serving at least the length of the sentence that they're serving. Some of them shouldn't be serving at all, but some of them
Was
certainly.
it also difficult? I mean, I guess the truth of it kind of is like you're getting out because of your last name. They don't really have those connections and they have to stay.
Well, I mean, I'm getting out. I want to, I mean, it's hard to say this because that means, I mean, I give it to God. I mean, I think there was certainly some divine intervention. Some of the friends who I met that helped me in DC, there's no explanation why I should have ever met them. It was totally coincidence. And I met them years ago, and turns out they were of great help. Um, but other than that, I had a dad, and I call him the prodigal son dad. I mean, he he called in every favor he had and was relentless. And some people were reporting he spent all this money. To my knowledge, he didn't spend a dime. On the second, when I got the pardon, he didn't hire anybody. He didn't donate to any. He just got on the phone and started asking people for help. And so it's the last name. I mean, I don't know if it's the last name because, like you said, Asa Hutchinson did not help me. My dad is a long retired senator who hasn't been there since 2002. He doesn't have any political clout, but he's got friends, and he loves me. And I mean, just unbelievable effort he did to get this to the attention of the president. And
What do you think the
I
factor?
give,
All right, go
let me
ahead.
give President Trump credit. I think there may have been other, like I think of Marco Rubio or somebody else may have pardoned me, maybe. Um, but it would have been at the end of their term, like most every other president does. And people say Donald Trump's, unorthodox, and I thank God he is. I mean, he is, no other president would have pardoned me at the beginning of their term. And I think, quite frankly, what he went through gave him a heart for people who have been involved in the federal justice system, and I appreciate that about him because it's a far from perfect system that we've had, and I I thank God that he wasn't assassinated. That he was so close to being taken away from us, and I mean, there's so many little things that had to happen for my pardon to exist that I'm just overwhelmed sometimes with how lucky I am, blessed I am.
The warden didn't want to let you out.
No, he he told me. I mean, they called me, and that's how I learned. It wasn't from my dad. It wasn't from my wife. The administration of the prison called me over and said, "You got a pardon. Pack your stuff." So they said immediate release. So I went, packed my stuff, gave it all away, and thinking I'm going to be immediately released. Well, that was about 5 o'clock, and I was saying goodbye to everybody, and had talked to my wife, called her, and um, 8 o'clock, nothing's happened. So I go down to the office and lieutenant's office, and was like, I introduced myself because I stayed pretty low key, and the staff didn't know me. I wasn't a troublemaker or anything. So I introduced myself and said, I understand I got a pardon. Y'all said immediately release, but it's been 3 hours. And she was like, well, we haven't got anything from, I guess there's some official paperwork or something. And she goes, it's not going to be tonight. It'll be tomorrow. And I was like, okay, disappointed, but I went back. I didn't sleep because I didn't have anything. First of all, I had given it all away, but I was also too excited. So I stayed up all night, showered at 3 a.m. and excited to be leaving at 6 a.m. I thought. And so at 6, I go walking out, and I'm going down to this building to get a wagon to help with my books. I wanted to take some legal books, and I didn't have much I was taking with me, but I wanted those books, and they're too heavy to carry, so I want to get this wagon. So I went down to get it, and the warden was standing out there like he does most mornings, and he goes, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I'm Hutchinson, and I've got pardoned, and I'm just going to go get the wagon." And I loaded my stuff, and he's like, "You didn't get pardoned." And I was like, he goes, "Well, what makes you think you got pardoned?" And I was like, "Well, for one thing, you all called me to the office and told me I got pardoned. And then, I mean, I talked to people. It's in the news. I got pardoned. I mean, what do you mean I didn't get pardoned?" And he said, "You didn't get pardoned. You go back to your cell. There's no pardon." And I didn't take it too seriously then, because he likes to, I don't know, mess with us. So I went back and concerned, but not. But then 10 o'clock came, and 11 o'clock really, we hadn't had lunch. I mean, lunch was happening. I still hadn't heard anything, but I had given my uniforms to where you're supposed to turn them in. So I went to lunch in my sweats. That was just what I was going to wear out. And I'm finishing lunch. I'm walking by, and he's there again. And he says, "Inmate, why aren't you in your uniform?" And I was like, "Well, we've been through this. I got a pardon, and I'm supposed to be leaving." And he's like, "You did not get a pardon. And even if it comes through, I get to hold you for 24 hours after we get it. You're not going home today." And so I went and called my brother, and I called my wife, but my brother was with her. And he called my dad, and I don't know who all, but 20 minutes later, they call me and report to R&D, and I was out an hour and a half after that. But no, he was.
Did you get a final word with the warden?
Last thing, he came in, all of a sudden he was really nice. And he was telling the staff there they got to hurry. He promised his boss he'd be have me out of there by 2 o'clock. And the last thing he said to me was, "So, how'd you enjoy your stay here?" And I was like, "You got to be kidding." uh, it
There's
was
there's a
surreal,
video.
to put it.
There's a video of you getting out of the car and your wife coming and jumping into your arms. What was that moment like?
It was the most amazing moment of my life, honestly. I mean, maybe a kid's being born, but it. What was funny was they had been waiting in that parking lot all day, and there had been that parking lot's where inmates report, and they pick him up and then take him on the base back to the camp. And so the inmates had been coming, and staff had been showing up, and the staff would be talking to them, and we haven't heard anything. And so they got to know the guy, the driver, the staff driver. And so they were looking for his van the whole time. And because the warden was determined to get me out of there by 2 o'clock, they said, "Well, the driver's not here." And he said, "Well, then call the assistant warden. Assistant warden will drive him up there. We're getting him out of here." And so the assistant warden got me in his personal vehicle and drove me up to the parking lot, which was about 2 miles away. So my wife and brother and a buddy of mine had been sitting there watching for this van. And so I drive into the parking lot, and I see all of them, their necks craned, just looking. And I'm like, "I'm right here." I'm here. And they don't recognize they're looking for the van. So I pull in, and they, the last second, my brother saw me and was like, "Ah, that's him." And so it was all kind of chaotic. I think they would have like been outside, and when I pull in, but it worked out perfectly. It was an incredible moment, and my wife has been through so much and sacrificed so much, and just I'm almost happier for him, for her, than I was myself. And then my dad too. I think it was more stressful on him, me being in prison, than it was on me. And to see both of them relieved and happy was amazing.
I see that you've been posting some pictures on social media wearing the MAGA hat, and I think I would wear a MAGA hat too if it got me 6 years off my sentence. But I feel, compelled to ask you if you're completely okay with the things Trump is doing as president, shipping people off to foreign countries, attacking judges, blackballing law firms, purging the government of people that aren't quote unquote MAGA, all these kind of things that your uncle warned about. You're a lawyer. None of that concerns you?
Well, I can't say I know the details of everything he's done. The things that I do know, I'm not only do they not concern me, I'm very excited about. Uh, I think, I mean, for instance, purging. Use the term purging. I mean, I there are our bureaucracies are need to be purged, if you want to use that term. They definitely need to be reformed, which is how I see it. And I think what he's doing, I know even in the BOP, which I became intimately familiar with, bringing in a Josh Smith, who's the deputy director now, who's a former felon, served in the BOP, served time there. Um, I think that's amazing. And others would say he's purged career people to bring in this outsider, but that's exactly what we need, I think. And he's got a he's got a heart for the mission instead of becoming just a go through the motions, continue every day. We're just going to push paper and get our retirement, leave. He's got a real heart for the mission. So, and then the illegal immigration, um, it seems harsh, but that's only because it's been neglected for so long, especially not, I mean, really just Biden years. But Obama was shipping out millions, and Clinton was advocating for a stronger border. And uh, I think the only reason that people are shocked by what Trump's doing is because it has been neglected for at least 4 years. And but I think I mean, every country has to have border. Every country has to have laws about entering, and enforcing those to me is his job. I mean, that should have been the job of the previous administration. And if they hadn't neglected it for so long, it would have seemed business as usual. But now it seems very extreme because, so no, and then I think, I mean, you look at the economics, there's just no denying he knows what he's doing. I mean, his first 4 years until COVID were unprecedented. And in a short time, inflation's down, revenues are up, the stock market's up, household income. I mean, every measurable statistic we have has improved. And so, no,
You're
I'm
full MAGA now.
I'm full MAGA. I was prior to the pardon. Again, in 2016, I didn't support him in the primary, and I thought he was unconventional, and it kind of shocked me that some of the his debate performances where it was that not your typical politician by any means, but he's got a. It's sometimes off-putting to people. I get that, but there's no doubt that it's effective, and the way he deals with foreign leaders is certainly unconventional, but it's effective. And ultimately, I think that's how we all should be measured, is by the effectiveness. And if that's the measurement, I don't see how you can legitimately criticize his performance. Now, obviously, there's personality things that you could pick apart, but overall, the performance, I think, has been fantastic.
Could you even criticize him if you? I mean, are pardons revocable? Are you like
Not to my knowledge. I don't think they're revocable. Um, and but I'm sure I could. I wouldn't relish it, but I
I
could.
wouldn't do it if I were you.
But I honestly, I mean, and quite frankly, being in a prison environment and watching almost all of the inmates not just support him but love him. Uh, I mean, like a real connection with him. That's for a Republican to have that kind of connection with African American men. There's something special there. I can't quantify it or describe it completely, but he's doing something that I think is good for our country. He's connecting with people who typically aren't connected to politics and connecting to people who certainly aren't connected to Republicans. And so watching them embrace him and become interested in politics because of him made me even more appreciative of him, because I can't think of any other politician out there who could engage the interest of my fellow inmates, certainly like he did.
What about the criticism that Trump is just issuing pardons kind of out willy-nilly based on who's powerfully connected or friends of his, and this isn't really what pardons were designed to be?
I think it's unfounded. I mean, again, my dad didn't hire anybody. He didn't contribute.
I mean, he was
He's
a
not,
U.S. senator, though.
well, 23 years ago, before Trump ever even thought about getting into politics. He's not close to Trump. I mean, I don't know if they've ever met, to be honest with you. I've never met Trump. I've attended the convention. I saw him from a distance, but I've never met him. Um,
What do you think the deciding factor was? What was the thing?
the key is, I think what Trump is doing is, I think he's correcting injustices or abuses, maybe, even if it's the net result may not be unjust. The means of achieving that were abusive. Uh, he's somebody who's experienced the abuses. And I think the challenge for somebody is getting your case through the 25,000 applications that are sitting there and giving his staff and him a chance to really review it. And that, that's a challenge, because 25,000 applications, it's, unless you have some way to, hey, would you please look at this? It's going to take a long time to get through them. They keep coming in every day, more and more. So I'm grateful that my dad knew people, and I had some friends that helped bring my case to the attention of the White House and to the president. But I don't think it's willy nilly. I don't think he's doing it based on.
Unfair?
I mean, I wish there was a way that everybody, all 25,000, could receive the type of attention that mine received. Um, Unless you expand the Office of Pardon Attorney's office by 1,000 lawyers, it's going to be hard. But I will say this White House is processing them and showing more attention to them than any other White House in the history of, as far as I know, at least, history of pardons. Uh, I mean, most of them languish over there for, years, like through presidential administrations, without ever getting looked at. And this White House has set up a new system by which they're actually reviewing them. Now there's a lot, but they're making a commitment to review them and take it outside of just the DOJ, where there's other people looking at it, and they're not getting squashed at the DOJ before they even get a fair review. So I think this White House, for guys like me who are seeking relief, I'd be encouraged. I think this White House is doing more than anybody else. But, it's still a daunting task to process that many.
You said that your dad didn't pay anything for this. You're saying money wasn't involved in any way? None of someone's friend did this and do business for that. This wasn't
No,
the way politics is.
no, not to my knowledge. And I think I didn't when I was in prison, but I've talked to Dad afterwards, and um, I think I have knowledge enough to say no. There was no, it was just friends of mine and friends of his went to work.
What are you going to do now?
I'm going to work on criminal justice reform. Um, like you mentioned, I did that prior to all this when I was in the state senate, so I had a passion for it even then. But now it's a burning passion, and I I promised those guys I left that I wouldn't forget them, and uh, I want to do everything I can to. There's, I mean, I don't. There's so many policies I could talk about, but I don't want to bore your viewers or listeners. But just briefly, we have 4%. We represent 4% of the world's population, and over 20% of the world's inmate population. And yet we have one of the highest crime rates, and we've been doing that for decades. And yet we have one of the highest crime rates in the industrialized world. Uh, Obviously, forget politics or just empirically, it's not working. I mean, this policy of mass incarceration has been disastrous. And now there are people who need to be locked up. I met some of them. I mean, there's people, it's dangerous for them to be out. And we need prisons and we need security, and totally agree. But there are a lot of people who we need to find alternative ways to recompense victims and to punish perpetrators, because this system is clearly failing. There's no data that could possibly justify what we're doing. All the data suggests it's disastrous. And
You sound
yet,
like a liberal.
well, maybe I do. I don't think it's Republican or Democrat. I think it's just smart. I mean, you can either be an idiot and keep doing what you're doing and get the same results, or you can say, hey, maybe we should try something different. To President Trump's credit, the First Step Act that he passed in his first term was the first significant criminal justice reform ever, I think, in this country. Uh, Heretofore, all we've done on criminal justice front is increase sentences, build more prisons, increase sentences, create more laws. We have 430,000, the number might be wrong, I'm going off of memory, but hundreds of thousands of criminal violations, just the federal code and regulations. Uh, there's a book written by Harvey Silverglate called Three Felonies a Day. And the premise is, he's a Harvard law professor, and the premise is the average worker commits 3 felonies every single day. They don't even know about it. And it's true. I mean, I can say this truthfully. I never knew I was committing a felony. If I'm not in, I like my life, and I would have gladly said no to those clients if I thought what I was doing was a federal crime. Um, and there's so many guys I met who, I mean, I could give you example after example. You'd be shocked that they're serving prison time for it. So my point is, our country has become in drugs, quite frankly, the drug laws are horrendous. It's not working. There's no improvement on drug usage because we're massively increasing the number of sentences. My biggest regret in life, and you've cataloged a lot of regrets, but my biggest is when I was in the House in 2005, I think, I sponsored and passed legislation that made manufacturing meth up to a 30-year sentence. And meth was a scourge at the time and dangerous, but 30 years of separating a dad from his children, and I've probably impacted negatively thousands of families because I sponsored and passed that legislation. And I've hurt a lot of people, and including my kids in some instances, but I've never done anything as I think, negatively impactful as I did when I passed that legislation. Now, in the Senate, I tried to rectify that and do criminal justice reform, but those families who were impacted will never be recompensed. Or so I think I'm going to spend the rest of my life talking to legislators and other policy decision makers, and hopefully use my story, including my mistakes on increasing penalties, to hopefully change their minds and eventually hopefully change policy and help both the victim and perpetrators' families and them, and bring more peace to our country.
I think that's a good place to leave it. I really appreciate this conversation. I found it fascinating. I hope people stick around for the whole thing because we went way over time. But I
feel free to edit it at will.
It was cool. So yeah, Jeremy Hutchinson, good luck. Congratulations. And I hope you're able to do all the things you set out to do.
I appreciate it, Drew. Thanks for having me on.